Have you ever felt like you're the only one in the room who sees what's really happening? Like everyone else is sleepwalking through life while you're wide awake, thinking thoughts that nobody else seems to think? You sit alone, not because you're lonely, but because solitude is where your mind finally breathes. And people look at you like something's wrong, like you need to be fixed, like you should want to be surrounded by noise and distraction and shallow conversation. But what if I told you that your preference for solitary thinking isn't a flaw? What if the greatest philosopher of pessimism, Arthur Schopenhauer, discovered that people who think alone possess knowledge that the crowd will never access? What if your isolation is not loneliness, but intellectual superiority? Schopenhauer said, "A man can be himself only so long as he is alone, and if he does not love solitude, he will not love freedom, for it is only when he is alone that he is really free." Think about that. Your freedom, your actual capacity to think clearly, depends on your willingness to be alone, not just physically alone, but intellectually alone, separated from the herd. Your entire life, society has told you that being social is virtue, that networking is success, that the more people you surround yourself with, the more valuable you become. But Schopenhauer saw through this lie. He understood that the crowd doesn't think, it reacts. It doesn't reason, it repeats. And when you choose to think alone, you're not missing out on connection. You're protecting yourself from contamination. Today, we're going to reveal what Schopenhauer knew that the masses will never understand. Why solitary thinkers see reality more clearly. Why intellectual depth requires isolation. Why the smartest people in history were often the loneliest. And why your preference for your own company isn't antisocial behavior, it's intellectual self-defense. Schopenhauer observed something that will disturb you. He said, "The more unintelligent a man is, the less mysterious existence seems to him." Read that again. The less intelligent you are, the simpler life appears. The masses walk through existence, never questioning, never wondering, never disturbing themselves with deep thought. They accept the surface. They live on autopilot, and they're happy doing it because ignorance is bliss. But you can't do that. Your mind won't let you. You see the layers beneath the surface. You notice the contradictions in what people say versus what they do. You recognize the patterns that others miss. You question what everyone else accepts. And this awareness, this curse of seeing too much, is precisely why you need solitude. Schopenhauer understood that intelligence and suffering are inseparable. The more deeply you think, the more you suffer, because thinking reveals the truth. And the truth about human existence is not comforting. It's not something you can share at a dinner party and have people nod along appreciatively. The truth is that most of human life is suffering disguised as purpose. Most of what people call happiness is just distraction from the void. Most of what society celebrates as success is just sophisticated ways of not thinking about death. And when you think alone, really think, you can't escape these realities. This is why the crowd avoids solitary thinking. Not because they're incapable of it, but because it's terrifying. It's easier to fill every moment with noise, with people, with activities, with anything that prevents the mind from turning inward and facing what's actually there. But you don't want that escape, because somewhere deep inside, you know that truth matters more than comfort, that understanding matters more than belonging, that clarity matters more than popularity. Schopenhauer wrote, "Solitude is the source of happiness and peace of mind, not social connection, not community, not belonging to a tribe. Solitude. Because only in solitude can you hear your own thoughts without them being drowned out by the opinions, judgments, and mediocrity of others. The uncomfortable truth nobody mentions. When you think alone, you're not just thinking your thoughts, you're accessing something deeper. When you remove the noise of society, when you strip away the personas and performances, What remains is the raw truth of existence, and that truth is what you know that others ignore. If you're feeling this, if something in you is recognizing itself in these words, stay with me, because we're about to go deeper into what Schopenhauer discovered about the nature of solitary genius. Schopenhauer observed with brutal clarity, ordinary people think merely of spending time. Great people think of using it. The crowd fills time, you use it. The crowd fears silence, you seek it. The crowd needs validation, you need truth. When you think alone, you engage with ideas in their purest form. You're not performing intellect for an audience. You're not competing for who sounds smartest. You're not filtering your thoughts through social acceptability. You're thinking for the sake of thinking. And this creates a quality of thought that social thinking can never achieve. Schopenhauer noticed that genius always manifests in solitude, not in committees, not in brainstorming sessions, not in networking events. The greatest ideas in human history were born in isolation. Newton during the plague, Nietzsche in his mountain retreats, Schopenhauer himself, living alone with his poodles, thinking thoughts that would outlive generations. Why? Because original thought requires freedom from consensus. The moment you introduce other minds into your thinking process, you dilute it, you compromise, you adjust to make it palatable. You sand off the sharp edges that make an idea true but uncomfortable. Social thinking is always compromised thinking, but Schopenhauer understood that most social interaction, when it lacks genuine depth, becomes performance. People gather not to understand each other, but to assert themselves, to prove their worth, to establish dominance or acceptance. Watch any social gathering carefully. How much genuine listening is happening? How much authentic exchange of ideas? Very little. What you'll see instead is people waiting for their turn to talk, people performing their persona, people saying what they think they should say, rather than what they actually think. This exhausts the solitary thinker, not because you can't perform, but because it feels like a waste of your mental energy. Every moment spent in superficial social interaction is a moment you could be spending in deep thought. Schopenhauer wrote, "We can regard our life as a uselessly disturbing episode in the blissful repose of nothingness." This sounds dark, but it's actually liberating. If existence is fundamentally suffering, if there's no grand purpose, then what matters? Not impressing people, not accumulating social capital, not being popular. What matters is the quality of your consciousness during your brief existence. And that quality is maximized in solitude, in thought, in honest confrontation with reality. The masses avoid this confrontation. They build elaborate structures of meaning, busy themselves with careers and relationships and goals, anything to avoid the fundamental questions. Who am I? Why am I here? What is the nature of existence? These questions have no comforting answers, so most people never ask them. But you do. You can't help it. And this is both your burden and your gift. Your burden because you can't escape into comforting illusions. Your gift because you see reality as it actually is. Write this down. Say it to yourself. My solitude is not loneliness. It's intellectual clarity. Because that's the truth that Schopenhauer spent his life defending. Now the core of Schopenhauer's philosophy becomes clear. He believed that the world is fundamentally will, a blind driving force that pushes all life forward without purpose or meaning. Everything you see, human behavior, desires, conflicts, suffering, is this will expressing itself. Most people are completely identified with this will. They want without knowing why. They chase without understanding what they're chasing. They suffer because the will by its nature can never be satisfied. You achieve one goal, and immediately the will creates a new desire. This is the hamster wheel of human existence, and most people run on it their entire lives, never stepping off long enough to see that it's a wheel. They think happiness is just one more achievement away. They never realize that the structure itself guarantees perpetual dissatisfaction. But when you think alone, when you remove yourself from the noise of collective wanting, something shifts. You see the will operating. You recognize it in yourself. You notice how desire arises, demands satisfaction, then immediately creates new desire. And in that recognition, you gain distance from it. You're no longer completely identified with your wanting. You can observe it. You can question it. This is freedom. Not the freedom to get what you want, but the freedom to see that wanting itself is the trap. Schopenhauer said, "Wealth is like seawater. The more we drink, the thirstier we become." The same is true for all desires. The only way out is not to satisfy them better, but to understand their nature and loosen their grip. And you can only do this in solitude, because in social settings, you're constantly bombarded with other people's desires. Their ambitions become your ambitions. Their fears become your fears. The collective will is so strong that it drowns out your individual capacity to question it. What the solitary thinker recognizes that escapes the crowd. Consciousness is rare. Most people live almost entirely in unconscious reaction. They're not aware of why they do what they do. They're not examining their thoughts, their automated responses to stimuli. But you're awake, at least more than most. And staying awake requires solitude because consciousness is fragile. It's easily overwhelmed by the unconsciousness of others. One conscious person in a room of 100 unconscious people doesn't raise the room's consciousness. The room lowers that person's consciousness. Schopenhauer understood that the thinking person must guard their mind like a fortress, because the world is constantly trying to colonize your consciousness with its values, its fears, its superficial concerns. Every advertisement is an attempt to plant desire in you. Every social pressure is an attempt to make you conform. Every criticism is an attempt to make you doubt your own perception. And if you're not careful, if you're not alone enough to think clearly, you'll lose yourself in the collective noise. If you've ever felt guilty for preferring your own company, let that guilt go right now. Your solitude is not selfishness, it's self-preservation. It's the price of maintaining clarity in a world designed to confuse you. The pattern repeats throughout history. Most social interaction becomes time-killing when depth is absent. It transforms into avoidance behavior, disguised as connection. People gather not because they genuinely want to understand each other, but because they're afraid to be alone with themselves. They're afraid of silence. They're afraid of their own thoughts. So they fill every moment with chatter, with entertainment, with anything that prevents them from having to sit with the reality of their own existence. Schopenhauer called this the herd instinct, and he recognized that the herd is fundamentally anti-intellectual. The herd doesn't want truth. Truth is divisive. Truth creates discomfort. What the herd wants is agreement, conformity. And when you're someone who thinks deeply, someone who questions assumptions, someone who can't just go along to get along, you become a problem for the herd. Not because you're attacking anyone, but because your mere existence challenges the collective illusion. This is why original thinkers throughout history have been persecuted, not usually with violence, but with social exclusion, with mockery, with being labeled difficult, negative, antisocial. But Schopenhauer understood something liberating. The punishment of social exclusion only hurts if you want to be included. If you recognize that the herd has nothing to offer you intellectually, then exclusion is not punishment, it's liberation. This becomes the secret that solitary thinkers discover. You don't need the crowd's approval. You don't need their acceptance, because what they're offering, shallow connection, comfortable lies, collective unconsciousness, you don't want anyway. Schopenhauer wrote, "A man can be himself only so long as he is alone. Your authentic self can only emerge in solitude. The moment you're with others, you start performing. You adjust, you filter. You become what's expected rather than what you are." And most people do this so constantly that they lose touch with who they actually are. They become their persona. They forget there's anything beneath it. But you can't do that. Your mind won't let you. You feel the performance as performance. You notice when you're being fake, and it exhausts you. So you withdraw, not because you hate people, but because you love truth more than you love belonging. Watch what happens when you embrace this path, when you stop apologizing for your solitude. When you fully accept that you're a solitary thinker, you become free, free from the exhausting performance of social life, free from trying to make your thoughts palatable to people who don't think deeply, free to explore ideas wherever they lead without worrying about whether others will follow. And in that freedom, your thinking deepens. Without the constant interruption of social demands, you can follow thoughts to their conclusion. You can sit with questions for days, weeks, months. You can have the kind of extended contemplation that produces genuine insight. This is what Schopenhauer did, and it's what every great solitary thinker has done throughout history. They traded breadth of social connection for depth of intellectual exploration. And history remembers their ideas long after the social butterflies of their era have been completely forgotten. Write this in the comments. I think alone because truth matters more than belonging. Say it like you mean it, because this is your path. Schopenhauer's most profound insight about genius and solitude reveals itself. Talent hits a target no one else can hit. Genius hits a target no one else can see. The genius sees what isn't visible to others. And you can't see invisible targets while looking where everyone else is looking. This is why genius requires solitude, because they're looking in a different direction than the crowd. And if you're constantly checking to see where everyone else is looking, you'll never see the invisible targets. Schopenhauer understood that original thought is by definition solitary thought, because the moment an idea becomes popular, it's no longer original. The cutting edge of thought always happens in isolation, and this creates a strange paradox. The people who contribute most to collective knowledge are often the least social. The people who eventually move humanity forward are usually the ones standing apart from humanity while it's happening. This is the loneliness of the pioneer. You're exploring territory that has no map. You're asking questions that have no established answers. And you can't do this in a committee. You have to be willing to be wrong, to be misunderstood, to be alone with your thoughts. And yes, it hurts sometimes. Not because you need the crowd, but because humans aren't wired for complete isolation. Schopenhauer had his poodles for companionship. Even he understood that selective connection with minds that actually match yours, that rare resonance, that's different from the shallow socializing you're avoiding. You're allowed to want that. You're allowed to seek the 1 in 10,000 who thinks like you do. Solitude doesn't mean total isolation. It means protecting your mind from mediocrity while remaining open to genuine depth. Schopenhauer spent most of his life in obscurity. His major work sold barely any copies when published. He gave university lectures that almost no one attended. He died believing himself a failure by conventional measures. But his ideas changed philosophy forever. This is the price and the reward of solitary thinking. The price is that you won't be understood in your own time. The reward is that you actually understand. And Schopenhauer grasped another truth. The quality of your life is not measured by how many people know you, but by how deeply you know yourself and reality. The crowd lives on the surface of existence. You dive deep. Not meaning in the sense of some grand purpose. Schopenhauer didn't believe in that, but meaning in the sense of richness, depth, the quality of your consciousness during your brief time alive. The masses will never understand this. They'll continue to pity your solitude. They'll continue to suggest you get out more. They mean well, but they're projecting their needs onto you. They need social connection because they can't stand their own thoughts. But you don't. You've discovered what Schopenhauer knew, that the highest pleasures are intellectual, that the deepest satisfaction comes from understanding, not from being understood. That solitude is not the absence of connection, but the presence of yourself, fully, without distraction. If you're feeling this truth, if it's resonating somewhere deep in you, then you've found your people. Not in a room, not in a crowd, but here, in ideas. Schopenhauer is dead nearly 200 years, but his thoughts are alive in your mind right now. That's the power of solitary thinking. Stay with us if you want to keep exploring these truths. Subscribe not to belong, but to think. We're here not as a crowd, but as individual minds that happen to be pointing in similar directions. Now Schopenhauer's final wisdom reveals itself, something that will either liberate you completely or disturb you deeply. Schopenhauer believed that life is fundamentally suffering, that all desire is suffering because desire is lack. Most people run from this truth. They medicate it with entertainment, relationships, achievement, anything to avoid facing the fundamental dissatisfaction at the core of existence. But the solitary thinker can't run, because in solitude, there's nowhere to hide. And paradoxically, this is where peace is found. Not in denying suffering, but in accepting it. Not in creating false meaning, but in accepting meaninglessness. Not in filling the void, but in sitting with it. Schopenhauer found that the only real freedom from the will is in moments of pure contemplation. When you're so absorbed in thought that the will temporarily stops willing. You stop wanting. You stop striving. You just are. This is why solitary thinking is the highest state available to humans, because it's the only state in which you're truly free. Free from desire. Free from the will. Free from the endless hamster wheel. The masses will never experience this. They're too busy wanting, too busy achieving. They've never sat still long enough to realize that the race they're running has no finish line. But you know this. Maybe you've always known it. Maybe that's why social life feels so hollow to you. Because you can see that everyone's performing, everyone's chasing, everyone's suffering and pretending they're not. So what do you do with this knowledge? Do you try to save the masses? No. Schopenhauer was clear about this. You can't wake someone who wants to sleep. The masses chose their path. You chose yours. Your path is solitary thought, deep understanding, honest confrontation with reality, and the acceptance that you'll be misunderstood, that you'll be alone, that you'll carry knowledge that others don't want. This is not a tragedy. This is your nature. Schopenhauer wrote, "The wise have always said the same things, and fools, who are the majority, have always done just the opposite. You're not part of the majority. You never were. You never will be. And that's not a flaw to be fixed. It's a reality to be accepted. So accept it. Fully. Stop apologizing for your solitude. Stop trying to be more social. Stop pretending to care about things that bore you. Stop performing interest in conversations that insult your intelligence. Be alone. Think deeply. Question everything. Seek truth even when it's uncomfortable. Live with the reality that existence is suffering, that there's no grand meaning. and find your peace not in denial of these truths, but in the clarity that comes from facing them directly. This is the path of the solitary thinker. It's not easy. It's not popular. It won't make you rich or famous, but it will make you free. Free in the only way that actually matters. Free in your own mind. And in the end, that's all you have. Your mind, your consciousness, your brief moment of awareness. The masses will waste that moment on distraction and performance and chasing illusions. You won't, because you think alone, and you know something they ignore. You know that the quality of your consciousness is all that matters. That clarity is worth more than comfort. That truth is worth more than belonging. That understanding is worth more than being understood. This is what Schopenhauer spent his life proving. Not through social success, but through the depth of his thought. Not through popularity, but through penetrating the nature of existence more deeply than almost anyone before or since. You carry on that tradition by being willing to think as deeply and honestly as he did, by choosing solitude when solitude serves truth, by valuing your own mind more than the crowd's approval. This is your calling. You were built for solitary thinking. Your mind demands it. Your consciousness requires it. And the more you honor that, the more free you become. So take a breath. Sit with yourself. Notice that you're thinking right now. Notice that you're aware. Notice that in this moment of solitary awareness, you're more alive than you ever are in social performance. This is the truth that the crowd ignores. That consciousness is rare. That thinking is difficult. That solitude is not loneliness, but clarity. You are a solitary thinker, and that's not something to fix. It's something to embrace. Welcome home.